I sit across from them, wrists shackled to the table, the faint metallic echo of the cuffs filling the sterile room. Two detectives, one leaning forward with a smirk, the other pacing slowly behind me. The one seated, let's call him Thompson, glances at the file in front of him and then back up at me, waiting. They're waiting for my confession, for me to spill everything in one neat little story. But life, as I've learned, is never that neat. So, what are we looking at here, Michael? Thompson asks, his voice casual, like we're two old friends catching up over beers. Is this a crime of passion? Or was this all part of some twisted game? I meet his gaze, the flicker of a smile tugging at the corner of my lips. You think you know what happened, don't you? He shrugs, leaning back in his chair. We have a pretty good idea. Man finds out his wife's cheating, gets pissed, takes it too far. Happens all the time. You just made it messy, eh? I chuckle, low and bitter. Messy? No, detective. What I did was meticulous. Calculated. Everything I did for a reason. And if you really want to know how I ended up here, you're going to need to sit back. Because this story, it doesn't start with the affair. It starts long before that. Thompson raises an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. He gestures for me to continue, and I lean forward, letting the memories unfurl. I thought I had the perfect life. Don't we all, at some point? My wife, Rebecca, was my world. We met 12 years ago, back when I was still fresh out of Special Forces, new to the FBI. She was everything I thought I wanted. Smart, driven, beautiful. I was a man used to control, precision, and when I met her, it felt like I'd finally found something real. Something I didn't have to plan or manipulate. Or so I thought. But perfect isn't real. And sometimes, the cracks are so small, you don't notice them until it's too late. It was subtle at first. A shift in her routine. Late nights at work that didn't add up. Secretive phone calls, a different energy between us. I'm trained to notice the smallest details. Body language, vocal inflections, patterns in behavior. I track criminals for a living, for God's sake. But somehow, I missed it happening in my own home. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. It was a Thursday afternoon when I first noticed something I couldn't ignore. I had come home early, a surprise visit, something we used to do back when we were still us. Her car was in the driveway, but when I walked in, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The upstairs bathroom door was slightly ajar, the faint sound of water running. As I moved closer, something caught my eye, a glint of sunlight hitting the floor just outside the door. It was a foil backing from a birth control pill. Rebecca hadn't been on the pill in years. Not since I got a vasectomy. We talked about it. Agreed on it. So, why was she back on it now? I felt the ground tilt under me, my mind spiraling in 1,000 directions at once. The affair wasn't confirmed yet, but in that moment, I knew. I knew there was no innocent explanation. No rationalizing this one away. I didn't confront her that night. I played it cool, acted like nothing was wrong. But my mind was already working overtime, piecing together the clues I'd been too blind to see. The long work trips that didn't make sense. The sudden uptick in her social media activity. The new lingerie she bought, but never seemed to wear for me. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. I needed proof. Here's the thing about being an FBI agent. You get access to some pretty advanced tools. Tracking software, phone cloning apps, surveillance cameras. It's all part of the job, and when you've spent your career using those tools to catch criminals, it's easy to turn them to more personal matters. I started small. I cloned her phone while she was in the shower, gaining access to her texts, emails, everything. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. His name was Daniel. They met at some work event, though the affair didn't start until months later. The messages between them were graphic, intimate. I felt sick reading them, but I forced myself to keep going. I needed to understand just how deep this went. The deeper I dug, the angrier I became. But I didn't snap. No, that wasn't my style. Instead, I started planning. I knew I could destroy them both. Financially, emotionally, socially. It wouldn't even be hard. But as the days went on, I realized I didn't just want revenge. I wanted something more. I wanted them to suffer. So, you found out your wife was cheating, Thompson interrupts, leaning forward. And instead of walking away, you decided to, what? Play God. I meet his gaze, unblinking. I didn't play God, detective. I just played smarter than them. His partner, the one who'd been pacing behind me, finally speaks. What about the night it all went down? What triggered it? You don't go from surveillance to what you did overnight. I smile. Ah, the night everything came crashing down. You want to know about that, do you? Well, I guess we're getting to the good part. It was a Friday night. I'd been building up to this moment for weeks, waiting for the right time to strike. I had it all planned out. Rebecca's humiliation, Daniel's downfall, everything. But there was one variable I hadn't accounted for. One that blindsided me. She knew. Somehow, Rebecca had found out about my surveillance. Maybe she noticed the cloned phone, or maybe Daniel had gotten suspicious. I'm still not sure. But that night, she came home with a look in her eyes that told me everything had changed. We sat down for dinner, the tension thick in the air. She didn't say anything at first, just picked at her food, her mind clearly elsewhere. And then, out of nowhere, she looked up at me and said, I know what you've been doing, Michael. My heart stopped. I played dumb, of course, but she wasn't buying it. She laid it all out. How she'd found the surveillance cameras, how she knew I was tracking her. I remember the way she smiled, cold and calculated. You think you're the only one who's good at this? She asked, her voice like ice. I've known for weeks, and I've been planning something of my own. I was stunned. This wasn't the woman I thought I knew. This wasn't the Rebecca I married. She'd been playing me all along, using the same skills I'd taught her, the same tricks I'd used on her. That's when she dropped the bombshell. You didn't think I'd just leave it at an affair, did you? Daniel and I, we've been moving money, laundering it through your accounts. And now, everything's about to come crashing down on you. I pause, watching the detectives' reactions. I can see the surprise in their eyes, the shift in their posture. They didn't expect this twist. They thought they were dealing with a simple case of a man driven mad by infidelity. But now, they realize it's so much more. You're lying, the pacing detective says, though his voice lacks conviction. You expect us to believe she set you up? I nod slowly. Believe what you want. But I have the records to prove it. She was siphoning money from my accounts, laundering it through shell companies, all while making it look like I was the one behind it. And when I found out, well, let's just say that's when things got messy. Thompson's hand hovers over the file, his expression unreadable. So, what did you do? I lean back in my chair, the metal cuffs clinking as I move. I confronted her, of course, but by then, it was too late. She had everything in place. All she needed was one final push. And that's when it happened. The night that changed everything. I'd confronted her in the living room, demanding answers, demanding to know how long she'd been planning this. But Rebecca was calm, unnervingly so. She didn't deny any of it. In fact, she seemed almost proud. You were so focused on Daniel, on the affair, that you missed the bigger picture, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. I've been one step ahead of you the whole time, Michael. And now, it's your turn to fall. Something snapped in me then. I didn't care about the affair anymore. I didn't care about Daniel or the money or any of it. All I cared about was stopping her. Stopping the woman who had systematically destroyed everything I thought I had. I lunged at her, my hands around her throat before I even realized what I was doing. Her eyes widened in shock, but she didn't fight back. She just stared at me, almost as if she'd expected this all along. And then, I let go. She collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, but I didn't care. I stormed out of the house, my mind spinning. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what to do next. I pause, looking up at the detectives. Thompson's pen is still, his eyes locked on mine. So, what did you do next? He asks, his voice barely a whisper. I smile, the memory still fresh in my mind. I did what anyone would do in my situation. I took control, and that's when I started playing my own game. After leaving Rebecca gasping on the floor, I didn't run. I didn't flee to some remote location or hide in the shadows. I went straight to Daniel. His office was downtown, a sterile high-rise where he ran his legitimate business. But beneath that, he was laundering millions. and I knew he was the key to unraveling Rebecca's plan. If I could take him down, everything would fall apart for her. When I arrived, he was alone, his desk littered with documents and cash, evidence of just how deep their operation ran. He didn't even see me coming. One moment he was counting his money, the next, I had him pinned against the wall, my fist inches from his face. "You have two choices," I growled, my voice low. "You tell me everything about Rebecca's plan, or I'll destroy you right here." Daniel, ever the coward, spilled everything. He told me about the offshore accounts, the fake shell companies, the bribes they'd paid to make sure I looked like the mastermind. And then he told me the worst part, the real reason Rebecca had done it. It wasn't about the money. It was about revenge. The detectives are silent now, their expressions grim. They realize this isn't the story they thought they were getting. This is bigger, darker. Daniel had given up the truth, and it hit me harder than anything I could have imagined. Rebecca wasn't just cheating. She wasn't just laundering money through my accounts. It was deeper, more personal. She had been planning this for years. According to Daniel, it all started before we were even married. She had been hurt by someone in the past, someone she trusted. The details were murky. He didn't know the full story, but it was clear that her need for revenge had metastasized into something else. Rebecca wasn't just trying to destroy me. She was trying to destroy everything I stood for. My career, my reputation, my life. And she had been patient, so very patient, building her trap piece by piece, using our life together as a front for something far more sinister. As I stood there, my fist still gripping Daniel's collar, the full weight of it settled in. I thought I'd been the one playing the game, the one setting traps, but I'd been wrong. I was just a pawn in her grander scheme. She had let me track her, let me think I was gathering evidence, while all along she was positioning me for the final blow. My mind raced. Rebecca wasn't just some woman scorned. She was calculating, meticulous, and far more dangerous than I had ever realized. But now I had the upper hand. I had Daniel's confession. I knew about the offshore accounts, the laundering scheme, the bribes. I could use all of this to bring her down, to stop her before she completed her plan. I let go of Daniel, shoving him into his chair. He slumped back, breathing heavily, eyes wide with fear. "Now what?" he stammered. "Are you going to kill me?" I stared down at him, my mind racing through 1,000 scenarios. Killing him would be easy, and God knows he deserved it for being part of her plan. But I needed him. He was my key to unraveling everything. "No," I said, my voice cold. "You're going to help me take her down." I knew I couldn't go back home, not yet. Rebecca was dangerous, and now that she knew I was onto her, she'd be unpredictable. I had to move fast. I left Daniel's office, my mind spinning with the next steps. The first thing I did was return to my office at the bureau. I had access to secure systems, and if I was going to expose Rebecca, I needed more than just Daniel's word. I needed hard evidence. The bureau had surveillance tech that even the most paranoid criminal couldn't evade. I used my clearance to tap into her phone, again. But this time, I was more thorough. I wasn't just looking for texts or emails. I was digging into encrypted messaging apps, tracking her financial records, accessing every corner of her digital life that I could find. And what I found was worse than I had imagined. Rebecca had been busy. Over the last year, she'd been funneling money from various clients, people with dark connections, into offshore accounts. But it wasn't just money laundering. She had been making deals, dangerous deals, with people who were much worse than Daniel. Arms dealers, human traffickers, cartel members. I stared at the screen, watching transaction after transaction scroll by. This wasn't just about revenge on me. This was something much bigger. She had ties to people who could make me disappear without a trace. Hell, she had ties to people who could make half the city disappear if they wanted to. And that's when I realized she wasn't just setting me up to take the fall for money laundering. She was setting me up for something far worse. Rebecca was planning to pin everything, her illegal dealings, her connections to the underworld, on me. And if she succeeded, I wouldn't just be ruined. I'd be dead, either by the authorities or by the very people she was working with. This wasn't just a fight for my reputation anymore. This was about survival. I knew I didn't have much time. I had to move fast, faster than Rebecca could. But I couldn't do it alone. The Bureau wasn't going to help me. They didn't know the full scope of what was happening, and if I brought this to them now, they'd likely arrest me based on the evidence she'd fabricated. I needed someone outside the system, someone I could trust. That's when I called Victor. Victor and I went way back, to my Special Forces days. He wasn't just a soldier, he was an operator. A guy who could get things done, quietly and efficiently. After he left the military, he disappeared off the grid, taking on private contracts, mostly black ops stuff that governments couldn't be publicly tied to. We'd kept in touch, loosely, and I knew if anyone could help me take Rebecca down, it was him. I made the call from a burner phone, keeping it short and cryptic. I didn't have to explain much. Victor understood the situation before I'd even finished the call. He told me he'd be in town within 12 hours. And I knew once Victor was involved, things would escalate. The next morning, Victor arrived at my doorstep, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his usual stoic expression unchanged. He wasn't one for pleasantries. As soon as he stepped inside, we got to work. I showed him the files I'd uncovered, the evidence of Rebecca's dealings, the offshore accounts, the cartel connections. He didn't ask how I'd let things get this far. He just absorbed the information, calculating, already thinking of the next move. "She's good," he said finally, his voice low, "but not that good. She's left traces, weak spots." "What do you mean?" I asked. Victor pointed to the screen, highlighting one of the financial transactions. "This. She's laundering through offshore accounts, but she's using a few low-level intermediaries. It's sloppy. They're the kind of guys who'd sell their mothers for the right price. We lean on them. We can get to her before she makes her next move." I nodded, the pieces starting to come together. "So we squeeze them." Victor smiled, a rare sight. We squeezed them. The plan was simple, but brutal. We tracked down the intermediaries, small-time players who were handling Rebecca's dirty money. The first one, a guy named Eric, ran a front as a real estate agent, but he was laundering millions through luxury properties no one actually lived in. Victor and I paid him a visit at his office, late at night. He didn't know who we were at first, but when Victor slammed him against the wall, holding a blade to his throat, Eric started talking. Fast. He told us everything. How Rebecca had used him to funnel the money, how she'd set up the offshore accounts. But there was more. He mentioned something that sent a chill down my spine. "She's meeting them soon," Eric stammered, his eyes wide with fear. "The cartel guys. I don't know where, but it's happening in the next 48 hours. She's closing the deal." I exchanged a glance with Victor. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. If Rebecca was meeting with the cartel, it meant she was tying up loose ends. And if we didn't stop her, I would be the final loose end she tied up. We left Eric trembling in his office, knowing he wouldn't be a problem anymore. But the clock was ticking. We had 48 hours to stop Rebecca. Victor and I left Eric's office in silence, the weight of what we'd just learned settling between us like a ticking time bomb. Rebecca wasn't just tying up loose ends. She was preparing for her grand finale. And I knew what that meant. Once she closed the deal with the cartel, she wouldn't need anyone anymore, least of all me. I was disposable, just another obstacle in her path to complete freedom and unimaginable wealth. If we didn't act now, everything she had built, all the carefully placed traps, would snap shut on me. Victor's voice broke the silence as we drove through the dark streets. "We need to find out where that meeting is going down. Fast. These cartel types don't stick around long after a deal." I nodded, gripping the wheel tighter. Eric didn't know the location, but someone else will. "Daniel." Victor shot me a look. "You sure he's reliable?" I stared straight ahead, the road a blur of lights. He doesn't have a choice. If Rebecca's trying to cut him out, he's going to want to save his own skin. He'll talk. We tracked Daniel down at his usual spot, a high-end hotel downtown. It was just after midnight, but he wasn't alone. When we found him, he was in the bar, sipping on a scotch, trying to look calm. But I could tell from the way his hand trembled around the glass that he was nervous. He'd probably been expecting us. Maybe he even thought we were working for Rebecca, here to tie up his loose end. Victor wasted no time. He walked straight up to Daniel, grabbed him by the arm, and steered him out of the bar without a word. I followed, ignoring the confused looks from the bartender. Once we were outside, Daniel finally found his voice. "What the hell, man?" he sputtered, wrenching his arm free. "What do you want now?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Rebecca, where's the meeting?" Daniel blinked, his eyes darting between me and Victor. He looked like a cornered animal. "I don't know what you're talking about." Victor stepped closer, looming over him like a dark cloud. "Don't lie to us, Daniel. We know about the cartel deal. You were part of this from the beginning, and now she's cutting you out. You think she's going to let you walk away clean?" Daniel swallowed hard, his bravado cracking. "I'm not lying, I swear. She didn't tell me where it's happening. She's been keeping everything tight-lipped lately, ever since she found out." "Found out what?" I interrupted, stepping closer, my patience wearing thin. "That you were on to her." Daniel snapped. "She knew you were getting too close, so she started shutting me out too. I'm as screwed as you are." For a moment, I almost believed him. Almost. But then I remembered something from the files I'd pulled, the encrypted messages between Daniel and Rebecca. He wasn't just another pawn. He had been helping her every step of the way. And now, he was trying to save his own neck. Victor must have seen it too, because before Daniel could say another word, Victor had him pinned against the side of the building, his arm twisted behind his back at a painful angle. "Talk, Daniel," Victor growled. "We don't have time for your games." Daniel winced, his face contorting in pain. Okay. I don't know the exact location, but I know it's happening at one of the docks. Pier 47. It's a cargo shipment. They're using the containers to transport the money. That's all I know, I swear." Victor let him go, shoving him back against the wall. Daniel staggered, rubbing his arm, glaring at us. "You happy now? You think I wanted any of this? I'm in just as deep as you are, Michael." I stared at him, the man who had once been just a name in Rebecca's texts. I had spent so long focusing on him, thinking he was the root of it all. But now, standing there, I realized he was just as much a victim of her manipulation as I was. "You're a liability, Daniel," I said quietly. "If Rebecca's cutting you out, you're already dead." His eyes widened in fear, the truth settling in. But there was nothing more to say. I turned to Victor, nodding. "Let's go." Pier 47 was quiet when we arrived, too quiet. It was a sprawling maze of cargo containers stacked like towering walls, the lights casting long shadows that danced eerily in the night air. We parked a few blocks away, out of sight, and made our way toward the docks on foot. Victor moved with the precision of a predator, his steps silent, his eyes scanning every corner. I followed, the adrenaline pumping through my veins. This was it. Everything we had uncovered, everything we had planned, was leading to this moment. The confrontation. The endgame. As we approached the docks, we could see a few guards stationed at the entrance. They were armed, and from the looks of it, they weren't just there to watch over a routine shipment. These were cartel men, professionals. Victor crouched behind one of the containers, pulling out a pair of binoculars to get a closer look. "There's too many of them for a straight assault," he muttered. "We'll need to be smart about this." I nodded, my mind already working through the possibilities. We get closer. Find out where Rebecca is, where the money is. If we can get to her before the deal goes down, we might be able to stop this without a firefight. Victor gave me a sidelong glance. "You think she's just going to roll over? She's playing this like a pro, Michael. She'll be ready for anything." I clenched my jaw. He was right. Rebecca had outsmarted me before. I couldn't afford to underestimate her again. We slipped deeper into the maze of containers, sticking to the shadows, avoiding the guards as best we could. Every step brought us closer to the center of the operation, the place where Rebecca would be waiting to seal the deal. And then, we heard it. A voice. Her voice. She was standing near one of the containers, her back to us, speaking into a phone. I couldn't make out everything she was saying, but I caught enough to know that the deal was about to go down. The cartel would be arriving any minute, and once the money changed hands, it would be over. She would disappear, leaving me to take the fall. Victor gave me a nod, signaling that we were close enough. We had to move now, before it was too late. But just as we stepped forward, a familiar voice cut through the air. Well, look who finally showed up." I froze. Daniel. He stepped out from behind a stack of crates, a gun in his hand, pointed directly at me. You didn't really think I'd let you take her down, did you? Daniel sneered, his finger twitching on the trigger. Rebecca might have cut me out, but that doesn't mean I'm going down without a fight. My heart raced as I glanced at Victor, who was already calculating our next move. We were trapped, Daniel on one side, Rebecca just a few yards away, and the cartel on their way. This was a disaster waiting to happen. You don't have to do this, I said, trying to buy time. Rebecca's using you, just like she used me. We can still stop her. Daniel's eyes flickered, but the sneer remained. Stop her? Why would I do that? You don't get it, Michael. I don't want to stop her. I want to be her. Before I could respond, a gunshot echoed through the docks. But it wasn't from Daniel. He staggered, a look of shock crossing his face before he crumpled to the ground. Behind him stood Rebecca, a smoking gun in her hand. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Daniel lay motionless, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. Rebecca's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something there. Something real. Was it regret? Or was it just the satisfaction of eliminating another threat? I told you, she said softly, lowering the gun. I'm always one step ahead. Victor tensed beside me, ready for anything, but I could only stare at her, my mind reeling from the events unfolding around me. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was survival. Before I could speak, the sound of tires screeching and doors slamming cut through the silence. The cartel had arrived, and now we were all out of time. The roar of the approaching cars jolted me back to the present, shattering the spell that had briefly held me and Rebecca in that deadly stare-off. Tires screeched as several black SUVs pulled up, engines rumbling like beasts ready to pounce. The cartel was here, and I knew we had mere seconds before everything turned into a bloodbath. Rebecca stood still, her expression calm, almost serene, as if she had anticipated this moment. In contrast, my mind was racing, trying to assess our limited options. Victor's eyes darted between me and Rebecca, waiting for my signal, his body coiled like a spring, ready to unleash hell if needed. But we both knew that an all-out firefight would end badly, for everyone. I took a step toward Rebecca, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. It's over, Rebecca. The cartel's here, and there's no way you're walking out of this. You've burned every bridge, cut every tie. Daniel's dead, and you can't blame this on me anymore. Her lips twitched into a faint smile. You never understood me, Michael. You always thought you were the one in control, that your training made you smarter, stronger. But I was always thinking 3 moves ahead. You think the cartel's here to kill me? She laughed softly, a sound that sent chills down my spine. No, they're here to help me. Before I could react, the doors of the SUVs flew open, and men in dark suits poured out, each one heavily armed. My pulse quickened as I realized the danger we were in. These weren't just some street-level thugs. These were professionals, cartel enforcers who wouldn't hesitate to put a bullet in anyone who stood in their way. I glanced at Victor, his hand inching toward his concealed weapon, but I knew we wouldn't survive a shootout, not against these odds. But then something unexpected happened. The men didn't turn their guns on us. They turned them on Rebecca. Rebecca's eyes widened in surprise as the realization hit her. This wasn't the cavalry she'd expected. The smug confidence drained from her face, replaced by something I hadn't seen in her before: fear. One of the cartel men, tall and scarred, stepped forward, his gun trained on Rebecca. Senora, did you really think you could cross us and walk away? You owe us more than just money. Rebecca's gaze flicked between him and me, her mind racing for a way out. For the first time in years, she was no longer in control. She opened her mouth to say something, but the man cut her off. You've been playing both sides, he continued, his voice low and menacing. We found out about your little plan to set us up. You thought you could disappear with the money and leave us to take the fall. Rebecca took a step back, panic flashing across her face. No, wait, this isn't what you think. I didn't. A single gunshot rang out, echoing through the still night air. Rebecca collapsed, clutching her side, blood seeping between her fingers as she gasped for breath. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend that her plan had unraveled so completely. She had always been the one in control, always one step ahead. But now, she was out of time. I knelt beside her, feeling the weight of everything that had led us to this moment. There was no satisfaction, no relief, just an overwhelming sense of finality. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling, as the life began to drain from her. "Why did it end like this?" I looked down at her, the woman I had once loved, the woman who had torn my life apart piece by piece. "Because you thought you were invincible, Rebecca. But no one's invincible. Not even you." Her eyes fluttered closed, and just like that, it was over. The cartel men didn't waste time. They moved quickly, dragging Rebecca's body into one of the SUVs. The leader, the man who had shot her, gave me a cold look. "This is the end of your business with us. You were never part of this deal. Stay out of our way." I nodded, knowing better than to push my luck. As quickly as they had come, the cartel disappeared into the night, leaving nothing but the eerie silence of the docks in their wake. Victor approached, his hand still resting on his weapon, but his posture relaxed now that the immediate threat was gone. "It's done." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Yeah, it's done." But as I stood there, the weight of everything finally settling on my shoulders, I realized that even though it was over, there was no victory here. Rebecca was dead. Daniel was dead. And my life, the life I had built, was in ruins. The next few days passed in a blur. The authorities were called, of course, but by the time they arrived at the docks, there was no evidence of the cartel, no sign of the deal that had almost cost me everything. Victor and I kept our story simple: self-defense, a business deal gone wrong, and Rebecca's betrayal. It wasn't hard for the police to believe. The evidence was all there, wrapped up in a neat, tragic package. But even though I was free, I didn't feel free. I returned to my empty house, the place where Rebecca and I had once shared our lives, and it felt like a tomb. I wandered through the rooms, each one filled with memories of a life that had been nothing but a lie. There was no escaping it. The betrayal, the manipulation, the way everything had spiraled out of control. Victor had offered to stay, to help clean up the remaining mess, but I told him no. This was my mess. I had to deal with it. And so I sat in the living room, staring at the blood-stained floor where Rebecca had fallen, the echoes of her final words still ringing in my ears. A week later, I found myself in a small office at the FBI. My superiors had cleared me of any wrongdoing in Rebecca's death. I was still an agent, still had my job, but everything felt different. The people I had worked with for years looked at me differently now. They saw the headlines, the scandal, the whispers of a double life, even though I had been exonerated. The truth was out there, but no one cared about the details. All they saw was the wreckage of my personal life, and that was enough to put distance between us. As I sat at my desk, staring at the stack of paperwork in front of me, I knew I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't go back to the way things were, pretending that everything was fine. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and walked out of the office without a word. I don't know where I'm going next. Maybe it's time for a fresh start, a new city, a new life. But as I drive away from the bureau, from everything I've known, there's one thing I do know. Rebecca may have been the mastermind, but she was right about one thing. I was never just her victim. I was a player in this game too. And now, the game is over. And that's how it ended. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below.